for today's assignment. And I will say as a disclaimer, I'm not a YouTuber. I don't do this for money or anything like that. And it really is just kind of a video service. That way you guys can continue and follow along. But for today's assignment, we definitely will need Miro board. And I know some of us probably already need access, so I'll go over to my activity board and we'll give some access to everybody. Send invitation. So you should actually go directly to Miro. It should directly work. I don't know why it gives me a 3-step process, but it does. But yeah, you guys both are added to the team successfully. But for today's class, just to recap yesterday, we just went over the introduction. Just in case you missed yesterday, we went over the course syllabus, so be sure to make sure you review that on your own. And we're basically going over today's assignment first, which is exercise 1. Essentially, I'm going to kind of do the whole thing, but as a disclaimer too, guys, I'm really just going over the steps of the program. I don't necessarily want you to copy the exact thing that I do, right? The thing that I make. Obviously, sometimes I'm just going for the sake of speed. I don't really want you to make a really ugly thing, right? Don't get me wrong. Professor Connor once said that everything that you do in architecture, you should strive for beauty. And that's something I literally tell myself every day, whether I'm changing my child's diaper or teaching something, I strive for beauty. It's actually a really ancient principle. And some would even say that it's locked within you, within your DNA. If you looked at the spiralness, you would notice that it's actually connected to the golden ratio, as well as, a lot of other things in the world. But interesting enough, when you strive for that beauty and you tell yourself it will be beautiful, you'll constantly change, right? The world around you is actually not changing. It is you who is changing, right? Either way, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. I think everybody kind of has a feel bad for me day. What I'm trying to say is that happens often when you're working with computers, right? Like, man, this thing just hates me. Things are not going my way. Restart the computer. Come back at it in 10 minutes. Seriously. You'd save yourself a lot of time and frustration of sitting, trying to... Have you guys ever heard the saying, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, right? It really is. And trust me, computers will make you go insane. But for today's assignment, let's go ahead and get started. I have way too many files. Let's go down to SAC. I teach way too many classes. Let's go to computer graphics. I taught it too many times. Let's go to summer. Exercises, and of course, exercise 1. And very often, even though I do print out and give you guys a copy, I typically put it on the Miro board as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is y'all's Miro board too. You can definitely use it to work together over online. It's definitely a lot better having like a FaceTime with somebody. I don't know, we did this a lot during the 2020 stuff because it was so much easier to work with a group of friends, everybody FaceTime and kind of work together in a space. Don't get me wrong, this is how internet schools, and there are internet architecture schools as well. They don't pay very well, but and it's a lot harder to teach online than you think, but interesting enough, I wanted to start off small. And in a metaphor kind of way is I want you to develop a diagram that could be easily read by a small child, right? I don't know about you, but how many of you guys played with Legos as a kid? Now, how many of you tried to do it without the instructions? Kind of, right? But you can never really build the exact thing on the box. I mean, you could look at the picture all you wanted and kind of like, yeah, I could see some of the outside pieces. But in some of those step-by-step details, you were like, oh shit, there's this like little tiny 1x1 piece. It's got to go here. I would have never seen that, right? However, they don't print different instructions for IKEA or Legos in different languages. Why? Because they're all visual diagrams. It says step 1 and it shows the interlocking piece and it goes down into another piece. Then step 2, it shows, the last step completion, and it shows the other pieces coming into view. Sometimes there's some other lines, sometimes there's different colors involved. Sometimes they'll even gray out the previous step, right, to indicate basically, well, this is the previous step. But you'll notice there's no language. There's no characters of English, France, any of them, right? Because it's all visual diagramming, right? How many of you guys have ever put together an IKEA product? Anybody? And in the instructions, the very first is like a guy scratching his head, right, showing a little IKEA bubble. That is universal in all languages. What are they trying to say? Hey, if you have questions, call us, right? How about street signs? Do they say stop? Well, some of them do, right? Some of them. What about your traffic light? Does it say stop? Does it say slow down? Does it say speed up at the yellow light? No, we communicate through colors, right, all the time. And in fact, you've been communicating with colors your entire life and may have not even really noticed it. How many of you guys notice certain colors that you wear, you don't like it when you wear those colors? I don't like when I wear the color red. I think I look awful. My skin tone seems off. And again, there's a diagrammatic pattern to that, right? Even the way that we choose things and the way that we communicate them, right? So for today's assignment or exercise, or this week, I should say, I want you to develop a diagram that is a step-by-step that almost does it to the most minimal value that you can, right? So I don't want a ChatGPT paragraph of step 1 and step 2 and step 3 of basically putting it all together. I want to see if you can visually put it together. However, at the same time, I'm going to be asking you and introducing you to a new platform such as Rhino 3D. So I think, at least in my opinion, it's better to learn a program with a task, right? Does that make sense? Because, I don't know, there's some teachers that go, here's how to do this, and they just do commands for like the first week. And I'm like, come on, just do a real project where you're going to use commands anyway. So again, if you're overwhelmed, it's a little on purpose, I'm sorry. But it is step by step, and like I said, I am going to do it for us with some tips and tricks as well. However, first thing that we need to do is actually go to Google Drive and go ahead and click on it and make sure that we have the base file that I've given you. However, you can do it without this file as well, but it is helpful. So we'll go down to Rhino 3D, Architecture 1315 files. You'll notice at the bottom there is a basic Rhino command template. Now, for most of us, I'm pretty sure I saved this as a Rhino 6, and it was 2022, so I'm pretty sure it was Rhino 6. So it should open for everybody's Rhino 7 or Rhino 8, but make sure you download that and open that program up instead, or that file, I should say. Once you do, you'll notice that it opens to a couple of things. You'll notice by default, I kind of have different colors than you guys. I kind of make it look more like AutoCAD and things like that. If you do want to change the preferences of the UI, which stands for User Interface, just in case you didn't know, you can also change those twos in Mac as well as Windows. However, you'll notice that I do a predominantly of my recordings in Macintosh. Keep in mind that they are the same program, but sometimes in different locations. For the most part, I do try to call out the Windows stuff, right? Such as the commands, certain key holdings that I'm holding on to. For instance, command in Mac is the same as control in Windows. I often sometimes accidentally say command or say control, but just know that I mean command and control are of course the same thing. The same thing could be said about option in Mac is the same as alt in Windows, right? So just in case you're kind of like, where the hell is the Alt button in Windows? There's not one. It's the, of course, Option key, right? Anyway, just as a small disclaimer. But yeah, if you did want to change the colors, you could go down to File, Settings, and you'll notice actually a plethora of tools here, right? Ones that actually control certain aspects, and we'll get into them as we go. But I first like to go overall over the interface, right? It should be read-only until you save. So if you go to File, Save As, you could save it in a location that you'd like. But I did set it as read-only. That way, nobody could accidentally change my Google template file. So go to File, Save. Not in the Google browser, but in your Rhino.
I don't see the file bar.
It's right at the top, right there beneath the little Rhino. It says File.
Oh.
Save as. Or save. And make sure you put it somewhere safe. Keep in mind, guys, another thing I should express is you should never work off of a flash drive. And it's very tempting on a school computer to work off a flash drive. It is possible if you have a very good flash drive. And if you don't know if you have a very good flash drive, you probably don't have one, right? They're usually very expensive and they have incredible write and read speeds, right? And there's a reason why they cost so much, right? If you have an external hard drive, that's another affordable and better option. It's going to run really great and it's not going to cost as much as just a standalone SSD. If all of this is sounding really foreign, be sure to ask me some questions about it after the tutorial. But good questions. If you open it and it says read only, make sure that you save as, and yeah, you should be able to edit it just as well. Good questions. But let's go ahead and get started. Just with the UI, you'll notice a couple of things are different. In Windows, you'll notice that the file, edit, view curve is actually in the program. That's kind of the main difference there. And really just kind of looks a little different. To be fair, some things are in different spots. Like for instance, the Windows kind of looks more like this. I usually like to make it a little bit bigger. And to be fair, we're not going to use all the tools available in Rhino. So I know it looks a little overwhelming right now, but I can assure you it's not, and it gets better. However, the UI, like I was mentioning before, is based on a tab, right? Just like a browser would be. So you have your standard actions such as, a new document, open, save. And for the most part, what's really nice is if you just hover over it, it's going to tell you what it is too. So again, another thing that's really nice is, well, if there's an icon for it, you can just type it in as well, right? So in the command bar, and the Mac, it's in the top left. You'll notice in Windows, it's at the bottom, right? Keep in mind, you can move all of this stuff too. So if you wanted to make your Windows look like Mac, or if you wanted the Mac to look like Windows, that second one is a little bit harder than you think. But the Windows side is a lot easier to move these windows around. However, this question comes up all the time. If you ever accidentally make too many clicks and you change your windows around, right? Let's say I accidentally do this, and I accidentally do this. Oh, how do I get them back, right? This problem happens every semester. I will say go to Window, and I'll say go to Window Layouts, and I'll say Default, right? So go back to my default, of course press yes. You can save that default if you want, just in case you're accidentally doing something else. But we can bring it back right to the original setting, right? So just in case, and I wanted to make sure I got that in the video, just in case somebody does that again. So you'll see that it goes back to our tabs of our properties, which is maybe the next thing to talk about. I like things really big just because I can't see too well on my screen. So you'll notice sometimes I use some pretty large fonts. Sorry, I'm kind of old, but you'll see we have the tab of the commands. We have our general use commands. Like in the Mac, this is kind of what you generally always use at least once or twice while you're working on something, such as explode and making a box. Obviously, there's a million ways to make a box. I noticed a few of you guys didn't get that on the quiz. I know it's counterintuitive. The best way to make a box is just to type box. It seems kind of weird. However, yes, technically, I guess you can make a square and you can change these things. You'll notice if I right-click, I can even take these and put them somewhere else, right? If I wanted to make that a little bit more accessible, I could even put it in my tabs, which is pretty nice and a nice feature that wasn't always available in Rhino. You always had to type. You eventually had to memorize all these commands, which, don't get me wrong, after the first 5,000 hours of architecture in Rhino, you start to memorize stuff, right? However, just to keep continuing, we do have our properties viewport, which is what this is called, but you'll notice that it actually has different abilities, right? It has a display tab, it's got a help tab, which on the Mac side is really useful. I have no idea why Windows really stinks at like helping you. It's just always been that way since like literally 1998. But what's nice about the Mac is honestly, if you type something like, I don't know, command, right, and you go to something, it's actually going to tell you exactly where it is, which, to be fair, I think why I like Mac a lot. It's kind of helpful. Anyway, so again, we have our help tab, but it is available on the Windows side, and then we have kind of those tools that we added ourselves. So again, we've got some variety there. One of the most important tools of all time is definitely your OSnap, right, which basically is the same as AutoCAD if you're familiar with AutoCAD. But again, a lot of people accidentally turn this off and they think that they're drawing accurately, and they're not. You zoom in and they're like lines everywhere. Of course, if you zoom out far enough, everything looks really great, right? But in this program, you have to remember that it's constantly making a projection for what you're doing, right? I like to explain what it's doing because a lot of students, especially younger students, they think that a lot of stuff is just magic when it's not. It's all code, just going really fast. But anyway, I have put a series of pieces for us, right, in our viewports, which is what these are called. So our top viewport, our perspective viewport. Some of you guys got that one right. Some of you guys got that one wrong. That's okay. But yes, our three-dimensional view is in our perspective view or our 3D view. You'll notice there's a front view and a right view by default. You'll notice there's this grid with some axes lines as well. That's referred to as our C-plane, right? You know, some of these things I'm actually saying, and if you type in C-plane, right, you'll notice that they're actually commands as well. We can move the C-plane. The C-plane is basically so you know where 0, 0 is at all times, right? But we're basically in a Cartesian coordinate system, right? You have your X, your Y, and your Z, right? If you've been in calculus, you probably even know a little bit more about the Z-axis, right? And how all three of these axes can work at the same time. A lot of people think architecture is like, oh man, it's all math, right? Well, yeah, but you don't necessarily have to do it, right? It's visualized math is essentially what we're looking at. However, just to keep continuing, those are changeable as well. You'll notice that there's a little down arrow, and we can even change the way that things are viewed. So for instance, if I double click on my viewport, it immediately makes it bigger. If I double click again, it'll go back to those 4 views. Now, I would say get used to this kind of 4-view way. However, keep in mind we don't always use elevation, so very often, the problem of having a very dense screen. You can still change these viewports as well, right? Just in case you wanted the top view to be pretty big, and of course the perspective be pretty big, you can of course do that. Keep in mind I can't edit undo that, so if I do Command Z, it's not going to undo interface changes. It's only going to do that to my commands. But that being said, for the most part, that's generally the UI. You'll have a few tools down here you'll notice, such as Grid Snap. Ortho is basically if you want to keep things in 90 degrees, it's orthographic view. So you'll notice if I draw a line, it's only going to draw it in a straight line, right, without holding shift. Of course, it would do that also if I just typed in line, had ortho off, and just hold shift too. Right, so I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a couple of things that come about, and again, I like to put them in this video just to, you know, practice, get familiar with the program itself. I'm basically assuming that nobody's ever touched Rhino, even though I know some have worked entire studios in it. So, for some of us, I know this will be a little bit of a bore. Get started, right, by all means. But in that case, let's continue and go over some of the commands. For today, I'm going to not go over the 3D commands just yet. We'll wait till Thursday for that one. Instead, I want to go over some of the 2-dimensional commands. And let's make this a little easier to see for you guys. Red is not maybe the best color on the projector today. So maybe let's choose yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and change my command line color. There's my layers, something quite familiar of every other program. I'm going to go with gold today because that seems at least easier to look at. Yeah, that's way easier to look at. But you'll notice I give us actually a couple of the commands that we use most commonly in architecture, such as trim, extend, fillet, chamfer, mirror, hatch, offset, divide, array, and close curve. Man, close curve's a game changer. I didn't even learn that one until like 3 years in, right? Again, I learned this program teaching myself. So one thing I wish I didn't do was make a bunch of bad habits because nobody was there kind of behind me to ask questions. Right? Or I wasn't able to ask questions really to anybody besides my student friends. And boy, does making bad habits, especially digitally, not the best thing, right? I was so used to my way of 6 clicks to make a box, where some guy next to me is like, dude, it only takes 1 click to make a box. This guy's already going 6 times faster than I am. You see the problem, right? But yes, I got myself out of that habit, but it was a really hard habit to get out of, right? So one thing I would say is use this class to develop really good habits, whether that means finally labeling your files correctly, such as computer graphics, underscore, summer 2025, underscore, exercise 1, and then underscore the date. All of those things will help you 5 years from now when you're looking for this file, right? What doesn't help is naming it final, 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 final for red. That doesn't help. So what I mean by really good habits, and don't get me wrong, I was right there with you. Naming it one, there were so many times I was frustrated, I was just like, hit the keyboard, that's its name, right? And I know we've all been there. However, I really wish I didn't do that because even today, I'm still looking for files, right, that I did or want to reference or use in my teaching that I can't because I'm literally looking through files. Or I'll find something like, oh shit, I was looking for that 3 years ago. And I suddenly get distracted for an hour, right? So again, make good habits. And this kind of goes along with that. However, let's go over how this works. So you'll see that it's in a step 1, step 2, step 1, step 2 kind of process. So one thing to be said is a lot of this takes some practice. It doesn't quite work like AutoCAD. It doesn't quite not work like AutoCAD. It's kind of this safe blend in between really all programs, right? So for instance, I can take trim and I could type in trim first, or I can select the lines I do want to trim. So again, there's some kind of options, and the reason I say that is because it wasn't always that way. Very often, especially in DOS, I know nobody even probably remembers what DOS is. Do you remember what DOS is? Maybe not. Obviously, I'm pointing out to maybe we're similar in age at least. But I remember my first computer when I was 4 years old, and it didn't have an OS. It had Microsoft 3.0, but in order to turn on the computer, you had to type in startup, \enter, and then the computer would turn on, right? Everything was a command. So keep in mind that this is kind of an old style of computing being used for this new style, right? And I love that it's still command because God, I wish Blender had a command bar, but it's not very good at NURBS, right? Yes, sir?
I've seen like some YouTube videos of they have a command bar. This is so.
They try to add one, yeah.
Yeah. Is there a way to add it?
No, it's awful. I thought there was maybe an update. I was like, really? Is there a command bar for Blender? Because I don't know everything either, and I look to you guys to share that information as well. So,
Even to put it in, even to put in the commands, like kind of like how AutoCAD.
Right.
When you type in the command, they don't have that at all.
Right. Unfortunately, no. And that's because it's a mesh program, just like Maya or 3ds Max. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of this probably sounds foreign to us, but again, I want you guys to also be experts in the computer as well, right? It doesn't make any sense to know how to use a computer, but also not know how it works, right? But absolutely true. But yeah, we can select both in this case. I could type in trim or TR, enter. And then I basically click on what I don't want or what I want to trim, right? So in my case, maybe it's that, maybe it's that. And obviously in my case, you can practice with trying to make it to what it is in step 2, right? Obviously I'm gonna edit undo mine, and I can hit escape if I didn't want to do that after all, or if I'm done, I can hit enter as well, right? And it'll go back to kind of 0 is what I call it. It actually has a name, but I call it 0. I probably shouldn't call it 0, but I say go back to home or go back to 0. That's because how I learned. That's how I go back home, right? Home is safe, right? So I called it home. Extend. It does make some sense, right? Obviously, extend is kind of weird. If I type in extend first, it's going to ask you what it needs, right? Whether it's Mac or Windows. And sorry, I have a very dense screen right now. There we go. It's going to ask you what it needs for the command, right? So at first it says select boundary of objects or enter extension length, right? Kind of arbitrary. In my case, I want to make this happen, and it looks, if I can compare the two, I want to make this line touch that line. So it's asking for my boundary. In my case, this could be seen as a boundary, right? If I hit enter, awesome. Select the curve that you want to extend. Well, that one, done, right? And I can't tell you how many times we need that. Now, I know I made that look like the slowest process in the world. Usually it goes about this fast, right? Done, right? So, I mean, eventually you play this thing like a piano. Eventually you can play Mary Had a Little Lamb very fast, right? Right? But at first you had to learn the song first. But yeah, extends pretty easy. Let's go on to a few others. Fillet. Let's type in fillet. Oh, not fill. Fillet. And you'll notice it's kind of like a search bar as well. In my case, it says select the first curve to fillet. Okay. Select the second curve to fillet. Okay. Sweet. did it, right? And of course it actually produced a radius for us based on the value that I had already defaulted there. Let's try that again. If I want to reenact a command, I can hit spacebar and it goes back to fillet. In my case, my first and my second, and I can do it again. However, let's try that again. And let's change my radius to, I don't know, 3. In my case, by default, it is in millimeters. So keep that in mind too. Oh. There we go. Gets a little bit bigger, right? You'll notice that it changed back to the default of the layers that I'm on. And that's pretty key too. You'll notice if I double click on command line, now that check mark is on this layer. And the reason it produced a red line is because, well, it actually produced that layer, right? So if I turn that off, just keep that in mind. The layer that you use or under is actually the one that it's going to draw in, which is awesome actually. Before that, it was not always that way, and it was very annoying. But as I was explaining yesterday over the history of Rhino, this comes from really us, right? All the developments that we were asking of Robert McNeil to change Rhino, this is it, right? Which other models have copied that, such as Blender, completely open system. But for the most part, I think these are pretty self-explanatory. Mirror, right? MIR, mirror. If I choose an object, mirror it. Yeah, pretty simple. Hatching, if I type in hatch, we can of course fill these things. And what's really nice is, you know, I know a lot of us come from Graphics 1 where you had to sit there and crochet with, you know, every single line. I hate to break it to you, but the good news is you no longer have to do that anymore, right? You can change the angle, you can change just about anything, right? We can make it 45s just like that. We can change the spacing of them and everything in between, such as the scale. Maybe we want it to be 2, maybe we want it to be very thin, and everything in between. So again, already a time saver in terms of the way that we draw. But you'll notice that these are all two-dimensional, right? Which is kind of nice because, well, I have a two-dimensional view, such as my top view. And if you've ever worked in AutoCAD, this is kind of the view that we're probably most familiar with, is essentially a top view. However, keep in mind, technically every view is a view, right? So even though it says top view, you can change it and manipulate it to other views. However, if you wanted to go back, you can go back to set view and go back to your top view, right? So again, I'm going over the basics. But let's actually get to the assignment. And like I said, I've learned some things or two over the time. And I'm going to go ahead and start making some other layers. So in my case for the assignment, I know I'm going to want probably a text layer. I'm going to spell text correctly, but in this case maybe not. I'm going to go with a modeling layer. Maybe even step 1, step 2, just because I know I'm going to have some steps. So I'm going to go step 1, new layer, step 2, right? And I can always add some more and double click and change the colors and everything like that. Honestly, we don't have to keep these colors. I use these colors so that I can just see better. Just keep in mind that no, we're not going to have any green or orange lines. But yeah, if you're like me and you can't see very well, changing the color can be extremely helpful. So let's go ahead and make some bounding boxes. In my case, I know that the assignment, oh, actually I forgot to tell you guys about this as well. So my student versions, don't update them. As soon as you update them, they'll stop working. You'll have to uninstall it and basically install it again. Now for the Mac, that's not so bad. But for Windows, it can be actually a pain in the butt. So never update Rhino. And in fact, on the Macintosh, it could be really subtle. You're like, it looks like one of those windows that you're supposed to just kind of continue, especially at 3 in the morning. You've gotten like 36 hours of, or sorry, you haven't gotten rest in 36 hours, and you just click on stuff at 3 in the morning, right? Never, right? Always skip the version, right? Especially on the Mac. Otherwise, you'll just have to install the entire thing again, delete it, anyway. Or ask Juan for an official copy. That way you can constantly update. Even though the updates don't seem to really change much, besides like the major ones like Rhino 8, Rhino 9, and so on. But let's go ahead and get started with the assignment. So I'm going to draw a rectangle first, because I like to be really organized with my drawing. I'm going to go ahead and put it actually at 0, 0. So I'm going to do comma 0, comma, or 0, comma 0, enter. And it's going to put it and start it at that 0, 0 point. In my case, I want to make sure that it's an 11 by 17. I mean, why not? I'm going to put it on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. So I'm going to type in 11 inches, enter, and 17 inches, enter. Now, you may notice something. What do you notice? It's pretty tiny. In fact, it reveals that, well, I think I'm actually in the units of feet. Now, what's great is that this is actually, so if I type in DIM for dimension, I can click on these 2 points and it'll tell me exactly what it is. It is 1.42 feet. Yeah, that's awesome, but I have not, like, I don't know about you, but 1.42 doesn't scream like, oh yeah, 17 inches in a certain scale. So, well, I might want to change my units first. So I'm going to type in units, and maybe if I switch it to, say, inches, well, that's going to be a little bit more congruent. However, keep in mind the project is asking me to make a 25 by 25 by 25 foot object. So I may not necessarily want to change that yet. However, since I have this ratio, it's always going to stay in this ratio. And to give it away a little bit, this first drawing that we're going to do is not to scale. So we can go ahead and change the proportions of this drawing. Obviously, I messed up my top view. My bad. Don't hold shift and move stuff. But let's go ahead and change that. You'll notice when I click on something as well, another thing of UI that I forgot to show you is called Gumball. Why is it called Gumball? I have no idea, but it is called Gumball. And when you select an object, you'll notice it brings up the ability to rotate it, or we immediately have these axis arrows to move it, and only in that axis. You'll notice it doesn't even show my Z-axis because I can't like take it out of the screen or even push it back. It would look the same in this orthographical view. So you'll notice at the bottom, this is true for both Windows and Mac, you'll see something that says Gumball. Make sure that's enacted because, well, if you click on something, now nothing comes up, right? However, with Gumball enacted, it is an incredible feature and a quick tool to move things, right? However, I could also type in move, enter, and of course move that back to a 0, 0 position, right? However, in my case, I want to size this quickly, so I'm just going to size it quickly. After all, this is just my bounding box for step 1. So let's say some text. After all, I just want to be organized and call it step 1. Sweet. Very tiny. That's okay. We can make it a little bit bigger. I mean, it doesn't have to be that big, but obviously I can't miss it. In my case, the beautiful thing about the digital world is the ability to copy. So in my case, I just typed in copy, enter. I'm going to hold shift so I can keep that, you know, I'm kind of OCD too. I like things to be really nice and organized. I don't know how. My entire house is not this way, but nor is anything else in my life this way. So I don't know why I have to be so organized in the digital realm. But you'll notice I spend a lot of time, often too much time. Please don't. You guys all know how valuable time can be in studio. So again, sometimes just being organized. Again, I'm trying to save myself time maybe in the future, right? Especially, you know, maybe I've got a very picky professor who's like, maybe they ask for that change and they see that change and they're like, no, go back to what you did. And you're like, go back to what I did 2 weeks ago? What did I even do 2 weeks ago? Oh, good thing I have step 1 where I labeled it of what I was doing 2 weeks ago. When in doubt, and you'll hear me say this a lot, make a copy of what you just did. Because guess what? You're probably going to mess up, right? And you don't want to do all of that over again. You want to start from the previous step that you were at, right? You'll see what I mean as I continue today. But we've got some steps ready, so let's go ahead and go to our instructions and see what the heck it says. It says step 1, create a 25 by 25 by 25 box. All right, I can do that. Go ahead and minimize those things. In my case, I'm going to type in box. I'm going to make sure I click on the program, type in box, enter. Now, to be fair, there is a lot of different ways to make boxes, and right now I'm in the wrong layer. So I'm going to exit or escape that real quick. I'm going to go to my modeling layer. I'm going to make everything red today. I don't know. Actually, red was kind of hard to see. One of my favorite colors, cyan. I don't know. I like cyan. Let's type in box again. Box. I'm going to click just really anywhere, and honestly, you can click anywhere, but I'm going to put it in my step 1 box, again, to be organized. But there's not like a rule, like it has to be in this box or something. I'm going to type in 25 foot symbol, or you can type in feet. Right? You can even spell the words, which is really nice. That was not always a feature, by the way. And sometimes not even true in AutoCAD, right? What you type in AutoCAD has to be that exact thing, otherwise it doesn't even recognize it. Not in Rhino. It kind of, it even picks one if you're just that wrong, which can be bad too. But you'll see now it's locked into 25. I'll type in 25 again, feet. Oh, 25 feet, enter. Oh, my bad. I forgot, press enter. And the height, I'll type in 25 feet. Obviously we won't see it in the top view, but if I double click on my view here, you should be able to see it kind of move. Let me show that in actually all 4 views. So type in box, enter, click, 25 feet symbol, enter, 25 feet symbol, enter, and 25 feet symbol, enter. Voila, box, right? Now, funny, 30 years ago, that took 30 minutes, for real. But it was revolutionary because, think about it. What if I asked you to make a 25 by 25 by 25 box in real life? It would cost you money, it would cost you time, and it would be a hell of a lot more, right, than simply doing it in this platform. So again, there's a reason why we use this in architecture, is because we don't have to build anything anymore, at least not physically, or waste that resource or energy. But we got a box. All right, step 1 complete. I didn't say it was going to be too hard, right? Step 2, subdivide the box into 9, right? So this is a 3x3 grid on all sides, right? So a little confusing, but this is what I mean. And to be fair, there's a few ways we can subdivide a box, right? To be fair, we could divide a line, we could do all kinds of things. I'm just gonna go over one today. And like I said, well, we're in step 2 now, so I'm gonna double click, step 2. And again, I like to be organized, and I like to make a copy. I know, I probably could just make a box again, but why? I mean, I've already got it, I already did it, just copy it. Another thing to be said is sometimes we get way off into the middle of the universe and we're like, oh crap, what have I done? I can't find anything. Oh no, I'm lost, right? You can simply click on something, right? Make sure that you're in the viewport that you want to see it, so just click on the viewport. And one of my favorite tools of all time is zoom selected. You can either type in zoom selected or click on this button and it brings it entirely into view. What's really nice about that is it even centers it for you. So it's like it's on the main stage. It's in the spotlight, if you will. And that can be really helpful, especially when I'm trying to orientate myself or anything like that. But let's subdivide this box. To be fair, there is a lot of different ways we can subdivide this. And to be fair, you could just type in subdivide, and I'll let you go and figure that out for yourself. I kind of like to do the manual way and the way that I would have taught myself, right? So I would have got a line, right? And basically chop this thing up. I'm not going to draw that line twice. I'm just going to copy it. In fact, I'll copy it again, right? And just rotate it. Good thing I have gumball and I can hold shift, and even my gumball will help there. Now, there's nothing I said about it had to be a perfect 3x3 grid, right? So you'll notice, at least what I'm doing right now, I kind of want you to do. I mean, we don't need perfect tic-tac-toe boxes, right? You could, if you would like to, and maybe that's the challenge that you want. But for me, I like irregularities. So for instance, I'd rather use something that is more akin to the golden ratio, right? So for instance, maybe finding my square. I don't know, I like a hierarchy as well. So I'm going to go with a large, medium, and small area, as well as a large, medium, and small area. I don't know, we can mix it up, why not, right? However, it said on all faces, or at least that's what I'm adding. I should probably add that to the instructions, but on all faces. So I'm going to go ahead and take these. You'll notice another thing that can take some practice. And let me explain. You'll notice when I want to select something, and just these somethings, I'll go to my left, right? Anything that touches the box when you're going to the left will be selected. However, if I go to the right, yeah, they're all touching the box, but if they're not entirely in this box, they won't be selected. Oh no, they weren't entirely in the box. What about this? These two are entirely in the box, but those horizontal lines are not. It'll select the ones that are inside the box because I'm going to the right. Now I know that's really confusing. To be fair, if you use AutoCAD or any other program, they do the exact same things. You probably already know how to do it and you didn't realize that you were already doing it. But going to the left, and as long as they're touching the box, they're selected, right? Again, you might have to rewind that one and take a look at it again. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and type in copy. And maybe I want that exact same ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it, go to my perspective view, and flip it on its side. I'm going to hold shift so that I know that it's exactly 90 degrees. And you'll notice it's even changed in my view. You'll notice that I'm constantly, I mean, I guess you can't really see my eyes right now, but I'm going constantly back and forth in between all of the views, but specifically between top and perspective right now, right? Okay, we got that side. That's looking pretty good. Oh, almost didn't get the box in there. That's okay. I can select everything in that box and move it. And I can even kind of move around and make sure, oh yeah, okay, that's looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit more down. Sweet. It's looking pretty sweet. And let's go ahead and get that last piece. So I'm going to copy just this one again. Again, you don't have to make a copy like I'm doing. You could really change it up. In fact, be creative if you'd like. After all, again, I'm not really so focused on the outcome as I'm really more focused on how you're communicating these changes or these manipulations, as you'll see by the time we get to the end of this. But that's looking pretty good. And to be fair, it could be as far out as we want for the next step that we're doing. We could push that back a little bit more. Oh, I don't want to extrude it. I forgot, there's some new features with Gumball that do stuff like that. Just be careful what you're clicking on. Like you'll notice I just wanted to move it, so I needed to select the arrow. However, they've added like this little extrude thing, which is pretty cool. But again, not always useful, especially if you just want to move something. You maybe don't want planes involved and things like that. But this is pretty great. Okay, step 2. Now it's asking me to divide it. So before I do that, I don't accidentally want to have to do all this again. So, well, to avoid that, I'm going to make a step 2.1. Because, well, we can. And again, this could be really helpful if, I don't know, instead of step 2.1, it said something like Bohuslav's critique on Monday. You see what I'm saying? Right? This could start to help you and actually make a board of all the different designs. In fact, potentially it even goes, hey, Chronodal, you know, we had this design 5 iterations back. What did you think about this part over here? Now, don't get me wrong, it's only probably me and Chronodal that would even look at a computer screen. Escamilla and some of the other professors, if you show them a computer screen, they're going to be like, no, print it out, right? Which is true, right? And to be fair, most professors, especially at Texas Tech or U of H or UTSA, they're going to expect some sort of printout as well. For the most part, everybody kind of has their own personal preferences when it comes to a screen. I personally have two 30 inches at home, and they're very close, so I can see really well, right? So again, be careful when you try to ask your professor to look at some of your interface on a screen. You may have actually encountered this already, by the way. But as we get to it, you know, keeping ourselves organized is super important. But let's go ahead and do those actions, or that step 2 now. So in my case, I'm going to use Wirecut, which is one of my favorite tools because it reminds me of 5th grade where my professor had this block of clay and they'd get some string and they'd cut it, right? And they'd pull the string right through the clay and the clay would be cut to these perfect little shapes, right? Essentially, we have a digital version of that where this is that wire that I'm cutting with and this is essentially the clay. Now, what's really cool about this is, well, I can do multiple lines at a time. Sometimes I can't, depending on the geometry. But in our case, it should be okay. And you'll notice I'm trying to glide around my object right now, and it's not really picking up the object. So I'm going to click on my object again and go back to Zoom Selected and recenter it. You'll notice when I move around now, it's almost, again, focused on the object that I selected. But let's go ahead and wire cut it, one stick at a time, just so you guys can see what that does. So I'm going to select the line. Honestly, you don't have to, but it's my habit. I like to select what I'm doing as I do it. So select, wire cut. It's going to ask, select the objects to cut. I'm going to select this one, spacebar or enter. And it's going to say, hey, which way do you want for that line, that string to cut through the clay? In my case, I want to go make sure that I cut entirely through the object. Now, it doesn't matter. I can go out forever, right? And to be fair, it's going to go, okay, which side do you want to cut, this side or that side? In my case, it doesn't really matter. Both will give me the same result, okay? I'm going to go with that side. And it's going to turn it into 2 pieces, right? Like 2 pieces of clay. Now I'm going to continue the operation. So I'm going to hit spacebar, piece, cut, cut. spacebar, piece, cut, 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 all those three. See what I'm doing there? So I'm basically going one at a time to make sure that I am dicing this correctly. Keep in mind you can do this all at once, but it requires a little bit difference. Again, I want you to learn this program, not learn what exactly I do, right? So let's continue. I'll wire cut this again. Cut, 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 cut that one. Make sure you go straight through and get that side. Awesome. So far we've got our 3x3 here. Let's make sure we get our top grid. Might be easier to look at up here. You can select these one at a time too, so if I hold shift, I can add to my selection. Just in case it's a little trickier, you can't maybe use the box or anything. And we can always move that out of the way. Let's do it again. So it looks like we need still, obviously we don't need this one, right? Or that one, because well, we've already got those. So this is what I meant by if you do them all at the same time, you're gonna get too many boxes, right? Well, I kind of gave it away, sorry. Anyway, maybe you'll figure that out for yourself. In our case, let's continue the wire cut. And in some cases, you might be like, well, I just want to make sure it goes through all of these pieces, and you may have like thousands of pieces, right? So again, make sure that you select everything. Enter, make sure that it goes through it in some way, and sometimes it asks for the weird one first. It's like, well, okay, that one and all the way down. Perfect. And let's do it again. Wire cut. I just hit space bar to enact wire cut again. Sorry, I have a bad habit of not saying what I'm doing out loud sometimes. I want it to cut through all those pieces. Enter. I want it to cut this way and all the way through. Sweet. Not too shabby. And as you can see, we have a 3x3, 3x3, and a 3x3. And it actually makes sense, right? Because if I do all of those at the same time, trust me, you're gonna get like 64 boxes and you only need 27, right? So I don't wanna do all that over again, I mean, especially for my next step, so I'm just gonna copy the piece that I want or need. In my case, it might be easier to go to a different view and capture that, right? Sweet. I can always go back to another view, copy. I can click really anywhere, doesn't really matter there. And I can get myself really confused and discombobulated. And we're good to go. All right, step 3. And I'm glad I saved all that because, well, remember the objective of this exercise is to show somebody with almost out using minimal words to get this point across, right? I want you to build a bowl of cereal and the person doesn't even know English. What would you start off with? Well, you'd start off with the cereal, right? The box, maybe still closed. Maybe your first step is open the box, open the packaging, maybe get some scissors involved, cut it. What's the next step? Pour it onto the floor? No, you gotta get the bowl, involved, maybe a spoon, maybe the milk. You gotta get all the ingredients, right? Maybe even show all the ingredients at first, right? Maybe a little legend of ingredients. Then step 1. Do you even have to stay step 1? Or is it minimal by itself? Do we show one circle? Do we show something loading, right? 5%, 10%, 20%. I mean, are there different ways that we can show step 1, step 2, right? Can we do it without really showing anything at all? I know Anelika probably has the most ideas because she's taken this portion of the class before. But some of the things that came up was like showing the image and then showing an arrow to step 2, showing an arrow to step 3, and then going final object. Here's the bowl of cereal, right? All put together. It's got the milk inside. It's got the spoon. It's even got the guy going, right? And everything. So you immediately know what to do with this object. Now, of course, we're not making a bowl of cereal. We're just doing step-by-step operations. But keep in mind, I want to use these to maybe express or communicate what I did, right? I don't want to tell them, I don't want to show them a video of everything I did. That would just confuse let's face it, a lot of people that we design and build for are not architects. They don't even understand floor plans, right? They're the little kids that want to put together the Lego blocks, but they don't know how. They don't know what it'll look like. They don't know the steps that it'll take to make that wonderful thing that they bought on the box, right? Anyway, let's go to step 3. But let's keep in mind, we want to keep all of our pieces. That way I can make a diagram, right? Whether it be some arrows or trees, obviously not some trees on this one, but. Step 3, remove 3 to 4 pieces. That sounds easy enough. I can do that. But I don't want to accidentally, again, get rid of something I may need. Since I already have a copy of it, I guess I could just start going for it, right? So I'm going to remove 4. I may remove 5. Again, the options are, yeah, you know, you can get fancy with the spices, as I like to say. But I'm gonna claim that that is one piece, and I'm gonna delete it. I'm gonna claim that that's one piece. And I don't know, you might just, depending on your grid and what you chose, you might declare, I want that to be one piece. And it's open to interpretation, right? There's 2 pieces so far. You know, I don't know. I'm gonna go with that piece and that piece. Again, I'm just holding shift and deleting 3 or 4 pieces, obviously. Pretty open to the word piece there. Let's get rid of that one too. Sweet. All right, remove 3 or 4 pieces. I don't want to do that again. However, you may also notice, how am I going to explain to somebody that I did remove those 4 pieces? Maybe there's a different step we can do. And thank goodness for Command Z, right? Because I can immediately undo that, or you know, if it was the point of no return, and you'll know what I mean one day, you can always just make another copy of that previous piece, right? After all, Chronodal may go, hey, I want you to destroy your whole model, and then go, nah, actually, never mind, that's pretty bad. Go back to the thing, and you're like, crap, I didn't save the last thing that I did, right? Again, so we're trying to organize ourselves in such a way that is brilliant for Studio. But in my case, I may want to make a copy, or even just show these instead of delete them, right? So for instance, maybe I just move it out. After all, I could almost even show that, maybe coming back in, or even show an arrow going out, going, oh, they removed those pieces. I don't want to type in removed 4 pieces. I want to show that I removed 4 pieces. Maybe this one was for the child center downtown. Maybe this one was removed because of the historical district. Maybe this one was removed so that people could have more access to the public. You get where I'm going with this? Eventually, the changes that we make are for architectural design decisions, right? So eventually, we want to communicate those. And as you can see, I'm not even choosing the same ones that I just selected, right? So I'm even already changing what I wanted to do. But theirs looks like 4 pieces. And to be fair, okay, yeah, never mind. It's still connected. I was afraid. You don't want to have like a standalone box. I mean, I guess you could, but it kind of ruins everything. But try to keep it as an object. But that might be a lot more useful in explaining the deletion of those 4. Now, keep in mind, these are not connected. And if I do want them connected, it's pretty simple. I can either join them or group them. So if I type in group, what's really nice is now I just have 1 click. I don't have to worry about all of those pieces. You know, right? Trying to put those back together. I mean, let's face it, that's just a waste of time. I mean, it could be done, but it's kind of a waste of time. Another thing that I could do is Boolean join them, which I don't really want to go over today, but technically you can turn them into a solid object. And for the sake of being able to move them, I'm just going to go ahead and group them. Now, if I just type in spacebar, it's going to regroup them. You'll notice at the bottom, it even says the command that it's doing, and it'll even say if it worked or not, right? So for instance, on Windows, the command bar is kind of nice. It actually has 3 lines. I have no idea why Mac was like, no, we don't want to show the command bar for some reason. They want it to be simple, I guess. But yeah, that is my one gripe about it. But nicely enough, these are a little bit easier to move and manipulate, just in case, I don't know, there's a little bit of overlap there, right? That might confuse them. There we go, no overlap. That might be too much overlap. Well, that might be the right amount. And again, anything that's going to make it easier for myself or somebody to read, yeah, that might be just perfect, right?
You unregroup them.
How do you what?
Unregroup them because if
Good
the
question.
line is right next to you, so it's like, hey, Ollie, let's slide that one back.
It's a great question. Ungroup.
Oh,
It's
there.
almost too intuitive. In fact, I mean, that's something I really like about this program. Even if I was so confused and I didn't even know what this was, I could type in what. It's going to tell me exactly what it is, right? I wish other programs would get on board, but keep in mind that other programs are made for stockbrokers. They're made for business. They're made for really other objectives, not necessarily making you a better student or a better architect. Whereas I feel like Rhino is actually giving me a space that is like a dream. It's more like a lucid dream where I get to actually do what I want rather than be limited by the program itself, such as Revit. Seriously. Revit is like, I feel like Oz is inside the machine and Wizard of Oz is this man going behind the machine. Anyway, not to get too metaphorical, but it was a great question. Obviously, group and ungroup to do those things. Another thing that could be said, and I'm glad you say that because it reminded me, you can also hide things and you can show things. So again, that's not to be confused with, you know, being able to just actually turn off the layer, right? Because you can always turn off the layer too, right? But sometimes stuff is just in the way sometimes. You just gotta hide it real quick. And again, sometimes we're like, where the hell did it go? Type in show, it'll come right back. But yeah, good questions.
So
Keep 'em
that
coming.
only works when you're like trying to hide something within the same layer.
When you turn off the layer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
but the hide command will hide anything. And it'll show anything too.
yeah, so like if we are working within the same layer, we can highlight part of it, or it's gonna highlight the whole layer.
No, it's just gonna highlight the only
Whatever you
part.
select.
Yeah, whatever you select. So that's a good question too, because it's kind of an order of operation things. I know Leo's a little bit advanced. He has worked in Rhino in a studio, as much as last year, correct? Right. I mean, I know if you have me mostly, we do a lot of this stuff, right? But he brings up a really good question because if I hide it, it's not going to hide everything else, which is kind of nice. So it's object specific, but also if I click on something else, spacebar, 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 I could do that incrementally. But if I type in show, it's all going to come back at once, right? So that's kind of nice. Again, I really wish Revit had something like, it kind of does. You can hit HH. Anyway, we're talking a little advanced, but let's continue, right? That was step 3. I want to stay organized, make good habits, and we got step 3. Now from there, in step 4, I may not need all these little extra boxes, right? Step 4 says apply wire cut or Boolean operation to 4 of any of the pieces, right? So what that basically means is it's a little confusing. I want you to apply it to at least 4 boxes. So what I mean is like, I want you to make another object and Boolean difference it, but it's got to be at least out of 3 or 4 objects. So here's what I mean by that, because that has confused some students in the past. So let's take this piece. Why do that all over again when I can just copy it? I can hold shift and make sure it's in the right spot. You'll notice another thing that I'm doing that I forgot to explain. If you hold shift and right click, it turns into a pan, which is very useful. If you don't hold shift, it'll rotate, right? So extremely helpful in that case, right? If you zoom in and zoom out, definitely just your scroll. If you don't have a scroll on your mouse, get one. No, I'm just kidding. You can do it with the trackpad as well, but it's just not as great. Just not a huge fan of it. And on the Mac, it is kind of like whooshy, you know, but you know, it's just kind of smoke and mirrors, if you will. But there is one command that Windows has that Macintosh doesn't have. Actually, I wonder if it's still in there. Can anybody, if you have Windows open right now, can you type in turntable and hit enter? I want to see if it still has it.
Turntable?
Turntable, like a record player. One word. Hell yeah! See, Macintosh won't do that anymore. But anyway, just in case you were wondering the differences between Windows and Mac, technically they are 2 different programs and they are technically working 2 different ways. But anyway, I like to share the cool stuff with my students. So, but we are at step 4 and it is asking for a Boolean operation, which I kind of mentioned earlier in step 3, if you will. But what I would like you to do is to influence at least 4 or 3, go for it, right? See what you can subtract or Boolean difference or Boolean split from this operation. So I may want the object in question. So for the sake of tutorial and speed, I'm gonna go with just like a regular sphere. To be fair, you could choose something like a paraboloid if you want, or a cone, or another box, or something of a regular shape, guys. Honestly, I get it, you're playing around with the program, but please don't make like a I don't know, a Waldo character or something, or like an Amoebius blob or something, even though it's technically possible, and you can subtract with it. But don't worry, we'll get fancier with the spices as we go along. Keep in mind that the objective here is to explain the bowl of cereal, not necessarily this extremely sophisticated object or anything, right? Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of us probably even go, whoa, I kind of see some architecture in here. I see some potential for space. I mean, that would be a really cool office building if I was down here, right? And I mean, don't get me wrong, my imagination runs away with me as well, but do remember that the objective is explaining the operations, right? So I do need to subtract something, and first I need something to subtract with. So in my case, I'm just going to go with a regular sphere and just make something real quick. Of course, I've got it in the wrong layer, so if that is the case and you do want it to be maybe the layer that you started with, you can always select the object, right-click on the layer, and change the object layer. You'll notice that it should immediately, oh, I changed it to itself. Change object layer, and of course it'll change color to that layer itself. If the layer is off, by the way, and you change the layer, it'll disappear, by the way, right? Because the layer is not being seen. But in my case, that might be actually kind of hard to see today. So let's go with subtraction object, right? There's nothing wrong with being extremely specific, especially when it comes to computer programs, and especially when you're working on a 5-story building for 16 weeks and you don't want to lose anything, right? Be extremely specific. There's nothing wrong with making that a good habit. In the words of Oscar Wilde, one is never overdressed or overeducated. Right? But let's make that easier to see. So I'm going to choose the opposite and choose, say, like an orange color. I'm going to select the object in question and change the object layer. Sweet. In my case, it's asking to subtract from at least 3 or 4, and you'll notice you can't really see inside this object right now. However, in our perspective view, you'll notice in our drop window, we have wireframe mode, which, don't get me wrong, looks pretty cool. Looks like it's straight up from 1985 video game, but is really hard to look at. Let's face it, I can't really tell what line is really where. There's no real line weights or anything like that. I mean, it's trying a little bit. You can kind of tell what's being hidden a little bit, but again, not that great. Rendered is cool, but also I can't see inside the box. Be very careful with your specific computer. You'll notice you need to update your drivers on a Windows. If you go into rendered view and it crashes, usually you got to update your drivers. And if you don't know what I mean by update your drivers, see me after class as well, because we can get that situated for your Windows computer. Ghosted is probably my favorite because, again, it kind of gives me a shaded and I can kind of see what it's doing, right? So for instance, if I want to make sure that this is going through 3 or 4 boxes, I really can, right? I mean, I can see that it's going at least through 1. Awesome. I'm going to hold shift and kind of check myself. It's at least going through 2. It's at least going through 3 here, but that's really about it. Uh-oh. So that doesn't really meet the requirements. Well, let's continue. Maybe push it in a little bit more. Okay, now it's at least hitting this one. Awesome. Not too shabby. But I don't want to necessarily do the operation, right? Because I may want to show that step kind of 1, step 2, and then show kind of what happened. I don't know, maybe it's actually this view, and I just kind of want to show that and then kind of the final object. I'll let that be up to you. But I'm going to go ahead and make an extra step for myself just in case, because I don't know what I want to do yet. So in my case, step 4.1, where I actually did the action. And again, you can make up really any kind of commands that you want. You can call it step awesome if you want. I mean, that's cool too. But step really awesome. I don't know how confusing that will eventually be. But in my case, I do want to actually join all these first. So I'm going to, and you know, maybe this guy's really in the way. Get him out of here, right? And as you can see, I'm still kind of like, whoa, I can't see anything. So I'm going to reposition that and be able to see a little bit better. Right? And I'm going to join these first. So I'm going to type in boo. I have no idea why it's called Boolean. In fact, I've even asked ChatGPT, and I think it comes from a guy who set it up. But I don't know. Maybe a story for another day. But I'm going to union them, right? Union, Latin, Greek for to bring together. State of the union, all that stuff. I'm going to do Boolean union, enter, and it should actually magically put it all together. You'll notice it came up with an error code, right? And well, that's because none of these are actually touching each other. Technically, mathematically, to us, it seems like they're together. And in fact, if you go to rendered view, you can kind of see it. It looks like it's together. However, upon viewing it, right, you'll notice that, ooh, it's not really together. It's actually mathematically together, right? They're really just the same face kind of touching each other. So, well, putting them together might not be so useful, right? So I'm going to go back to, say, my ghosted view and maybe put together one at a time, right? Because, well, it's struggling to kind of do that all at once. So let's make sure that maybe, well, can it do it one at a time? Awesome. And so you'll see that just because you try one thing with everything and it doesn't work doesn't mean simplifying it won't, right? And vice versa, to be honest with you. Sometimes the simple stuff doesn't work and the complex stuff will union. So keep in mind that it is kind of this dream world. Sometimes the operation works because the math works. Sometimes the operation doesn't work because the math does not work. I mean, if two planes aren't touching, how is the computer really supposed to know that you want to put them together? Now, when they are for sure touching and that's the only thing that is touching, now the computer has an easier time of going, I know what they want to join. Does that make sense, guys? Just because I know a lot of students, especially with AI coming on board, they think that that there's a lot of magical clicking, but sometimes it's actually simplifying what you're doing in order to make it work. Now, once I've done that, I can select anything, spacebar, anything, spacebar, anything, spacebar, and so on and so forth, right? And I can do it essentially one at a time. Now, if I didn't make a copy, subtracting that would be insane, right? So good thing I made a copy just in case I mess up, right? You'll find that it actually makes you a pretty worry-free person too, at least in my case. But now we've got this object that's together. And in some cases, you'll see that, wait, like certain things still aren't going together. And don't get me wrong, there's newer versions that say like TextDot now. To be fair, I don't really want to go over those except just how annoying they are. Usually I click in there and I just delete them. Basically, it's a way of Rhino going, hey, you have an error right here. This is where the error is, but it doesn't tell you what the error is, right? But it definitely lets you know where it is. But again, it's not a smart system. A lot of people, I know they just tagged the word smart onto a lot of technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's thinking or has the ability to reason. But as you can see, I'm running into some issues of getting all these pieces together, so I might need to actually, again, try simpler things. Try the ones that are already touching first. And in my case, see, there's the issue. And I do actually sometimes like to show myself having the problems. That way you guys can kind of see what to do in those situations. But yeah, it doesn't look like it really wants to go together there, and it definitely seems like these guys are the issue. You'll notice that it turned into an orange dot. Because of that was the layer, of course, of subtraction. And good thing, too, because if they were cyan, I might have missed them or things like that. So never a bad idea to change your layers and colors and things like that. However, to put them together today, I'm going to kind of just fake it till I make it. Or verify that these are actually touching, too. Because don't get me wrong, it may look like they're touching, but as soon as I zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, they might not be. So I'm going to move it real quick. Just up real quick. And move it back down. That way that I know that these are actually, you'll see that it snaps into view. That is because of my O snap. You'll notice that if these are turned off, and the ones that I do like to turn on are end, point, mid, center, intersection, and perpendicular. But you'll notice even the word actually pops up. Now, since I'm recording my screen, it's kind of getting fickle right there. You'll see that it pops up right here. It'll usually say end. In my case, it doesn't because I'm recording. But I'll take those two pieces, try again. It might not work, might. Nope, still didn't work. That's okay. I'm going to make them touch now. And so minusculely that nobody would ever have to know, right? I'm just going to barely put them. They're barely intersecting each other, right? I want to see if that helped at all. No, didn't help. Okay. And that's okay. We'll just have to subtract from two objects and hope that it actually works. But that's okay. Let's see what happens. For the most part, the reason I put those together is just, again, to make this next operation easier. Just in case you were wondering. To be fair, sometimes, depending on the object you make, you might not have to do that at all. So, but in my case, I got it boiled down to 2 objects that won't go together, and that's okay. I have a feeling it's also this piece right here, but anyway. It's okay, we can move on. Let's still subtract them. So in my case, Boolean difference. Difference is another word in math to say subtraction. So in my case, it's going to ask for select the surfaces or polysurfaces to subtract from. Definitely want to subtract from this one and this one. So I'm going to hit spacebar or enter. And then it's going to say select the surfaces or polysurface to subtract with. That would be this surface. Enter. And in my case, it may have left the piece there. It may have not worked. Let's try one piece at a time. I'm going to hit spacebar again. Boolean difference. And you'll see it actually says Boolean difference failed. Ooh, that's no bueno, right? That's okay. We run into failures all the time. In fact, I would say it's the only way to success, actually. Let's try another operation, because in your case, your geometry might be a little different than mine. Keep in mind, I'm going an orthogonal object against a curvilinear object, and there might be some instances in between. And what I mean by that is, well, it may not be able to know how to resolve that, and it immediately tells you, hey, I don't know how to mathematically resolve this, and that's okay. It's because it's having trouble with both of those. So let's try split. So Boolean split is a lot like difference. Split still technically does the same thing. So I'm going to select this one and that one. Enter. Let's see if it did anything. It should have made a third piece. No, nothing. Let's maybe try and move my object a little bit. Let's try that. Let's try difference again. No? No. It's still erroring out. That's okay. That's okay. Move my object a little bit. I don't want to accidentally break my rules, but I do want it to work. So again, the definition of insanity, right? Don't just try to do the same thing over and over again. Move some things around. After all, the object is not really what's important, really just the way that we put it together. So let's try that one. Boolean difference, that one and that one. Enter. Oh. And it looks like, oh, still failed. Oh, okay. Man, what's going on here? It might be the object that I put together. So let me try something real quick. And after all, I can leave that there. I can put it on pause. This is exactly what I mean by like put it down for a second, right? Try again. After all, I mean, we have another copy. No big deal. Let's try, I'm gonna go with Boolean split. I usually do Boolean split. But let's take these 2 objects and maybe these 3. Enter. Maybe just one object at a time. All right. I mean, it's kind of lame, but it worked. There you go. And as you can see, it created a new surface for us. I'm going to kind of leave that there because I don't want to, obviously I got to do this one at a time because of the geometry I chose, but that's okay because I want you to kind of run into these problems too. Let's try that again. So Boolean split, split with, oh, got it. And clearly that was the issue for probably that main piece. Let's try it again. Enter, space, sweet. So yeah, clearly it was the Boolean union operation that kind of did it for us, right? It was too complex of a geometry, and the math really couldn't get solved out. Sweet. But I'm just hitting spacebar now. Now you'll see that I kind of have to now test some objects. Like, does it touch this one? I really can't tell if it's really touching there or not. So I mean, why not? Spacebar. Piece. Oh yeah, it was touching it, right? So there are some things we can identify, but then once we're finished, again, I might not be finished, and I definitely don't want to do all that over again. So again, when in doubt, make a copy. It's one of my favorite rules. Now let's go ahead and move it out of the way for the sake of diagram, and maybe even delete the parts that we don't need. So those ones that basically got subtracted. Oh, see, I missed one. Why didn't you guys tell me? But clearly, this is not going to be the piece I need, right? And moving that back into place is going to be heck, right? Again, I don't want to do that all over again. I know I make it look like I mess up all the time, but I am doing this stuff on purpose, right? But we got to get that last one, right? So let's go back. Good thing I made a copy, right? Oh, I don't want to use Boolean union again. Split. Let's split this one with this one. Enter. Oh. There we go. Now let's make a copy. Now obviously we don't need this one that's like wrong, so don't want to double up. You could also get, I don't know. Some people like this. Some people it like just totally ruins their what do you call it, OCD? But I'll do stuff like that, like just change it. I wanted to like take it in there. Anyway, it's part of the same step, right? But let's go ahead and take that one out now. And get rid of what we don't need. So, there. For the most part, we've actually finished all the modeling, right? The next part, which, yeah, we have time for, is essentially just, well, diagramming it, right? Putting it in Illustrator and getting it ready to actually go from now 3D to 2D, right? Which, of course, is probably one of our best friends, Make2D, right? Anybody use Make2D before? Even for just like cheesy stuff? I use it all the time. Like, I mean, when I need to make a drawing. But let's go ahead and make a step-by-step now. We'll go to our top view. And after all, we do need an 11 by 17. Good thing I already have one of those. And it just needs to be in the right ratio, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be to scale. And we'll make it over here. Why not? In fact, I'll even call it the final diagram. I'll go through this part pretty quickly, just because I do want a few minutes. I know I'm kind of over talking today. Kind of got started a little bit late and ran into some issues, but yeah, for the most part, well, what do we do for the first step? I mean, what kind of view do we want? Do we want them to all be different views? Is that the best way to view something? Probably not, right? If I constantly change the orientation of things, I'm going to really confuse somebody. Right, you may have noticed in that Lego diagram that they even show you the same view through every single step. Sometimes they'll even show you like a little window of it looking the other way, you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, I don't know how many of you guys are into Legos or IKEA furniture, but I'm sure some of us, especially as architect majors, have put stuff together, or our parents are definitely the ones that, you know, can you put the TV together? Can you put, you know, they're always asking us to do all that stuff. So usually we're pretty good at instructions. However, let's get each of those steps and make 2D them. So in my case, let's get step 1. That's pretty simple. I might not even need this step 1. But I want a consistent view, right? I don't want necessarily just this view and then have to do this all the time. Okay, take that view, get this one, right? Everything like that. I can really do it all at once. So if I go to this down arrow, I go to set view. I'm going to go to an isometric view, such as, I don't know, northeast, or, you know, it doesn't really matter. In my case, probably southeast would be better for me. It's just kind of the view I want. Where'd I go? Set view, isometric, southeast. There we go. That's the view I actually wanted, but what's great is it kind of locked it into place. However, you'll notice that, well, if I make 2D, this actually looks like triangles more than it does really a box, because of this. It only looks like a box because of the shade and shadowing that is being done. So what I like to do is actually shift it a little bit. That way there's a little box in there. You see what I did there? So I don't know, I get a little fancy with the spices because I know actually some of the errors that come up when they do. However, all I'm asking for is that you at least stay consistent. Right, so if I hold my pan now, it's going to keep that consistent view, right? But let's make 2D. It's as simple as it sounds. Enter. I'm going to select the view that I'm in. So right now it's not in parallel view, so I need to make sure that it is. You'll notice that I can't really select that, right? So again, make sure that it's not in the top view, the front view, or the right view. Otherwise, you'll get the wrong view, right? So we'll make sure it's in parallel. I don't really need my hidden lines, so I'll turn that off. we'll eventually need them, but we don't need them today. And maintain source layers. I mean, I did all that work in my layering. Of course, I want to keep it, right? So of course, and layer name make 2D is by default. So when I do that, you'll notice that it made a little 2D version, right? So if I look at it actually in my top view, hey, nice. There's step 1. Fair enough. Let's go a little bit quicker. I'm gonna take all those, make 2D. Awesome. And you'll notice it always puts it on your C plane, by the way, right? Step 2. And again, I don't want you to just stop there or anything, but we'll continue the conversation if we run out of time today. Step 3, sweet. Take all those, make 2D. I don't know about you, but do you think we're saving any time? I mean, can you imagine if I told you to draft all this? How long would it take you? Now that one doesn't look like it's gonna quite fit yet, so, and I accidentally messed up my view that I wanted. Oops, that's okay. We'll go over eventually how to like keep those views. Leo might already know, of course, his named view. I'll eventually go over those things as we move and continue on. But for those of you who actually already know these steps, like Angelica and Leo, we'll be really looking to you when we pen up to see some of, see that experience that you already have, right? Where are you taking it to the next level? And you're just kind of automatically leaders when you know a little bit more than the rest of the class. And it's just a good responsibility, right? But there's the step that we wanted to show, right? Maybe I still do actually want to show it in like an easier way, because I can always delete those lines. Well, why not? Let's. But I did move it in weird spots. Nah, let's stay with that one. But yeah, I probably shouldn't have moved it. I probably should have made a copy before I moved it. However, I didn't move it too far, so maybe we still have the attempt. And again, I'll make another copy. Let's go that way. That'll be my final. But maybe that's the view I want to show of it like coming out. So make 2D. So maybe there's step 3 and maybe step 4. And maybe my final object. Notice it'll keep the view that I give it though, right? So if I accidentally get a view like this, or let's say I isolate it a little bit and I skew it a little bit, it's gonna get that exact view, which again is great, but also sometimes not great. And voila, instant drafting. However, you'll notice, especially with circles and things that are curvilinear and really rely on the shade and shadow element, they don't necessarily always get the lines involved and things like that. However, for the sake of tutorial and at least getting started, I do want to eventually, at least for this tutorial, get into Illustrator for us. That way we can start talking about it, at least how to turn this now into line weight in a very simple way. So let's just imagine like I was all done. Obviously, we'll probably discuss this some more on the first pen up. Obviously, I want to see what you're capable of first without me telling you what to do. I've already given some hints like arrows and numbers and pie charts and loading bars and all different kinds of ways that we can communicate things. I usually do that in the recording, but I kind of ran out of time today, so I apologize. But once you are done, finished drawing. Now, one rule I would say is that we do not draw in Illustrator, right? At least not in the beginning, not until we get a little bit more advanced in how to use Illustrator. For the most part, we want to begin with Illustrator as our line weight tool, right? Some of you guys may have already used Illustrator to maybe scale the drawing or print out something or maybe add text to it or something like that. But what's great is when you draw in another program and you use Illustrator for what it does best, change line weight at the click of a dime. It's also really good at taking our layers that we used in Rhino and using them in Illustrator, right? Again, another good reason to use Rhino, because Revit doesn't do that. Blender doesn't do that. All these other programs don't do that. Again, another reason why Rhino is preferred in architecture and really a lot of other design programs. But let's make those a little bit smaller. Like I said, I don't want to do this smaller and bigger thing in Illustrator. I don't want to align things. I want to do all my drawing, if you will, or my arrow addings, or maybe even placeholders for my text. Cool. Right. I'd want to do that all here. I'd want to put my name in there, right? I mean, one of the requirements you'll see on the assignment is that your logo is in the bottom left or right hand corner. Honestly, I can't remember. Where's it at? Maybe it's in another paper. But yes, please make sure at least your initials or your name is on it. Because we want to be proud of our work. We want to be able to go, dang, look what Love is doing in step 3. How'd she do that? I want to be able to go up and ask her, hey, what did you do to get that in step 3? And she's going to be like, it's a crazy story, right? It all started when I was making step 2. Anyway, so this is looking pretty good, right? But let's imagine that it was completely drawn. I finished everything that I want to finish. I could even add some hatches, by the way. I forgot to, again, I kind of ran out of time. But hopefully you guys are getting the idea that there's a lot to be done and there's a lot we can do, right? We can add shade and shadow to all of these elements just like that. And that is way easier to do in Rhino than it is in any other program. Right, I can change that to 1 and by golly, right? I didn't have to sit there and draw some lines or anything like that, right? Now it's all being done for me. However, it looks too perfect. It looks too Toy Story 1, if you ask me. Have you guys ever noticed Toy Story 1? It's too perfect. Actually, if you look at all of Andy's friends at his birthday party at the very beginning, they're all Andy in different colors. Because they didn't even have enough money to make different characters, right? The stuff you notice in film, right? Anyway, that is kind of one of my hobbies. But in our case, we can even add hatching, solids, colors, hatchet. I mean, everything is drawn, if I haven't made that point more clear than now, is drawn in Rhino, not Illustrator. Even though technically it is possible, just not accurately. So once we're done with that, I'm gonna go ahead and open up Illustrator. And first things first, let's say I was completely done drawing, I'm going to export it, right? So I wanna get my 11 by 17 or my ratio of 11 by 17. If I didn't want that, I can also hold Option or Alt and, get out of here. I don't want you. Anyway, we can go to File, Export Selected. And in my case, there is a heck of a lot of options. You'll see that it just has about every file type there is known to man. And hey, look at that, they added a new one, Adobe Illustrator. Now, to be fair, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Right. I will say if you have the latest Illustrator version, it usually does work. However, if you're like one update underneath, for some reason it doesn't. Right. So I would try it because it is useful and nice to already have a file type that is that way. However, if it doesn't work for you, the tried and true way is a DWG, AutoCAD. Yes, Illustrator opens up AutoCAD's add files as well. I'm going to go with exercise 1. In my case, export. Again, we want to make good habits. Don't call it test. Don't call it test exercise 1. You want to keep track of these things. Maybe you just call it lines or line work. So again, getting familiar with the vocabulary that is used as well. I'm just going to save it on my desktop. However, in your case, it should be in your architecture computer graphics folder, right? Under exercise 1. Desktop, save it. In my case, it's going to bring up another window. You just want to choose the oldest lines that you can. So for instance, I'm not going to choose 2018 lines, that's newer, whereas 2007 is the oldest lines that I can choose. And I'm going to do export. Sweet, done. And while I'm in Illustrator, I'm going to go to File, Open. I'm going to open up that DWG, right? So in my case, there's that exercise 1 export line work. Double click. And in my case, I don't want the original size. Why? Because this thing is actually ginormous. Remember, it was in feet. Remember, that's why our little 11 by 17 was so tiny, right? So we don't want original size, otherwise you'll click on it and you'll be like, nothing happened, sir. Well, it is there, it's just the size of this room, right? But unfortunately, Illustrator doesn't have a way to show you that, right? So in my case, I'm gonna select Scale to Fit Artboard. That way, by default, I can see it. Now keep in mind, we're starting off this way because I know scale for some, especially, I know I have some students who haven't even taken D1 yet, They don't even know what to scale means in some cases, right? Not to say that you don't, but we want to start off small, and we want to start off with actually ratios, right? So in my case, that bounding box, remember the one that I made that you can barely see now? It's there, right? And it's bounding that 11 by 17 ratio. So the first thing that I want to do in Illustrator is obviously change my paper from a square to 11 by 17. So I'll go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and change it. You'll notice by default, and if you don't have these tools by default, you need to make sure you click on this and go to Essentials Classic. Then you will get all the tools. I don't know why they got rid of tools, maybe making it easier, I don't know. I tend to think that the people who work at Adobe don't actually use their programs. Go figure. But because it doesn't seem that way. Anyway, bad joke. So let's go to File, Document Setup again. Of course, if you click on outside of this box, it'll basically go away and you'll have to start over. But if you click on the artboard itself, you'll see that we can change the dimensions at the top. Right now it's 36 by 36. So in my case, I want a 17 by 11. Sweet. You'll notice it's a little too big, right? Because it was scaling to fit that artboard. Good thing I made that bounding box, and I'm holding Shift so that it stays proportional, right? You'll notice if I don't hold Shift, that is not what we want. So I definitely want to hold Shift and get my bounding box to line up with my now piece of paper. That should be the same ratio. You'll notice if I just dial it in just correctly, you'll notice that we get these little purple lines that even try to help us, right, align things. Now, as long as I'm holding Shift, you really shouldn't have a problem. And to be fair, we can kind of fake it till we make it. But for the most part, you should find that the purple lines line up that bounding box perfectly to the 11 by 17. And voila, we have our 11 by 17, but you can't see anything, right? Luckily, since we did our line in layers, you'll click on layers and voila, we have our exact same layers. I know this sounds like, why is he so giddy about this? Because it wasn't always this way. In fact, it used to comprise all the layers down into one, and you immediately had to separate them again. You either had to do this in Rhino, which is a pain in the neck, and trying to get all your layers and colors together. Again, it's best to just separate the program to do what it does best. Rhino draws really good, 2D and 3D. Illustrator makes line weights really good. We have both for free. Why not use them both? So in my case, it's very simple. I'm going to turn each layer off one at a time. You'll notice this invisible box that you can't see but turns into a box indicates selected art. Click to select art. That's a really bad way of saying it selects everything in the layer, but it does. So essentially, if I click on that invisible box, it'll select everything in that layer. I no longer really need the bounding box, so I'm just going to delete that. I mean, why keep stuff that I don't need? There's that Make 2D layer. I can select everything in there. And as you can see, I accidentally got my text as well, or at least some of those pieces. I can double click on the color itself and change it to a more fashionable line weight. Now, something about line weight, and this is kind of a secret trick that you don't have to tell anybody, but the secret to having really good line weights is not using true black. Why? Because, well, that printer is often way too dark when it uses true black. So what are we trying to mimic? If computer graphics is computer, what are we really trying to mimic here? What you guys just did on the drafting table. And I don't know about you, but what did it take to make a perfectly dark line? Took your ink, right? And we could separate the difference between the graphite and the ink, right? Even the darkest, like even if you got like a HB and you like drug it into the paper and you looked at it, it still wasn't true black, right? It was actually a dark gray. And to be fair, I like to mimic that exact thing, right? So that way when it prints as if somebody drew it and drafted it. In fact, the whole reason that we do computer graphics or even use a computer at all is to draft it, right? We're basically taking the same things that we do on the table and now do them in a much more efficient way, right? Let's face it, I don't even have to print this. I could print it 1,000 times. I can save myself millions, potentially hourly, right? Now, why they don't even pay us more, go figure, right? They're saving all this money using us being on computers, and that savings never seems to somehow reach the user. But that's okay. If you have your own business, you'll see why. But in our case, we do want to make it slightly dark, right? And we do have about 3 minutes left. I do apologize. But we can essentially do this one at a time. So each of these layers, I'm going to select everything in that layer. I'm going to select the darkness, and what's nice is, well, it does that pretty much automatically for me. But again, you'll notice I don't choose true black just because it's true black. I actually often choose a very grayscale that is based on, say, a drafting. We'll talk about that more as we go on, though. You'll notice that I'm able to also change the thickness of it. So if I wanted it to be like super duper duper thick, I guess you could, but that looks awful and literally like kindergarten. So let's not do that. And instead maybe go with, like, I don't know, something more sophisticated and refined as 0.55. I could also still select some lines. I could hold shift, and as you can see, holding shift in Illustrator is like, what the hell am I selecting? But as you can see, we could still make some pretty dominant objects. So for instance, maybe that's a 1.2. And I don't know about you, but that was way easier to do. Oh, sorry, it's a little hard to see on the, it'd be a little bit better in the recording. It kind of looks green on the screen for some reason. But as you can see, we can still change the line weight. And let's say I messed up. Oh man, in the real world, I would have had to do the whole drawing again, right? In this world, I simply click on the line and change it to something else. Awesome. Right. Now, obviously, that's not correct. Don't do that. Obviously, you guys know, because you've taken Graphics 1, that that would not be correct. But again, we can change things here. And we can do it all in one layer, right? Again, that's kind of key. There's another layer I have. Let's just select everything in that layer. You'll notice since it's a hatch, I may have to explode it. I may have to actually double click on it and change some things. Obviously, I left some things a little for you to figure out, right? And intentionally. Of course, if you double click on a hatch, you can actually isolate it and still change its options. And there's my cool. Bless you. But as you can see, entirely a lot easier to deal with. In terms of, I mean, this comes from somebody who tried to do all this in Rhino back in the day and did, but it also took me 26 hours when it could have taken, oh, how long have we been recording? An hour? I kid you not. I would do the exact same thing teaching myself, and it would take 3 days of work. And it was because I was teaching myself the program, struggling. Nobody there to go, hey, just click on the layer, bro. I was sitting there like trying to draw on Illustrator, trying to do all this stuff, and getting really upset because I was seeing everybody else around me do so well, right? But hopefully this is enough to get us started and excited for now using both of these programs, right? Obviously you can use this video as reference, but to be fair, it's just one of those things, guys, that you're gonna have to experience yourself, and you're going to have to just give it a scholarly try. You're gonna fall off the horse and you're gonna have to get back on. You're gonna be like, dang it, where did I put my layers? I'm gonna have to reset my window. And you could do that here too, or you can go to your layers, right? I can turn all of those back on, and suddenly I have a finished drawing if this thing would get out of the way. Sorry, there are some new features that even I'm not used to yet. But I don't know about you, but I guarantee you I couldn't do that in an hour drafting, right? And that is the real game changer here, and why we use these technologies in architecture as early as your freshman year. Because, well, it's becoming the standard since 1996, unfortunately. Now, not the case at San Antonio College, right? We still teach you the blends between these two things. However, if you were to have started at UTSA or have started at Texas Tech or U of H, you would have started day one with this, which is why this elective class at SAC is so important for our students, because otherwise you might be already behind by the time you get to another school. Make sense? At least why we're covering this. Again, hopefully a review for some of us. Please take it to the next level, if you will, metaphorically. For those of you, this is your first time working with Rhino, go at your own pace. Follow this video. Follow the sound of my horrible voice on this recording, right? Any questions that I could maybe add to the end of this video? Again, there's no such thing as a dumb question. In fact, the only thing a dumb question is one that is not asked, right? Is actually how the saying goes. The reason I say that is because somebody might have the exact same question, and what's nice is I can do it in real time on the recording. That way, again, somebody who maybe not be so outspoken can still get their question answered as well. Anything come up? We went over a lot. And again, it's just us. So,
How do you save on Rhino?
yeah,
All the work, like if I want to close my laptop.
absolutely.
how do I save it?
Now on a Mac, it's kind of cool. You don't have to save. I know, it's kind of weird. It saves for you automatically if you're on a Mac. However, if you're on Windows, you will need to go to File. In your case, you have a Save As option or Save. I usually choose Save As. That way I can make sure I like seeing the file type and everything like that. But you'll see if I hit Save on the Mac, it's just like, okay. It doesn't really do anything. Like, it'll open the previous file that I opened, right? So that download, obviously don't accidentally delete that downloaded file that you accidentally double clicked and opened. On the Windows side, I can kind of simulate it, if you will. We'll go to File. In my case, it's like yours says Save As, mine says Export. But in your case, you want to make sure that it's a Rhino 8 or just a Rhino file, right? In my case, I think by default, I've given you guys a Rhino 6. Now, the thing about that is we don't actually have that problem anymore. We have Rhino 8 on the computer, so I guess I don't really have to explain that. But it's not backwards compatible. Just like if you put a PS2 game in a PS1, it's not going to work, right? Because it's a higher version. You can't put a PS4 game inside of a PS2. It's not going to work, right? Same thing could be said about an Xbox game and a PS4 game. It's just, they're non-compatible, right? But unfortunately, what's nice about at least Rhino is it's backwards compatible, at least to its own previous version, right? So I can open up a Rhino 8 in Rhino 8. I can open up a Rhino 2 in Rhino 8, right? However, Revit is not this way, so we'll get there when we get there. But it's a really good question. Just make sure you save it in a good spot. But yes, any other questions, guys? Where to save is definitely important. No others? Fair enough, could get started. Keep in mind, tomorrow is a work day, and I may have a little bit of part 2 that I just don't record. Very often I set up my computer, and if you have like an actual question, I kind of do it for everybody in the class, because somebody, again, might have the same question. But again, I'll upload this video by 5 o'clock today, and we'll go from there. Another question? Yeah?
Can I get your number?
For installing?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We'll definitely get to the install questions. But let's go ahead and end the recording for today.